Hi. Guilty as charged. I am Tanya Stewart, and welcome. I've been doing art for as long as I can remember, literally. A lot of my early memories involve being seated on the floor with a blank piece of paper in front of me and something in my hot little hand going scribble, scribble, scribble. And apparently enough people thought I had a gift or an obsession or something that my parents put me in a class or two, and I had teachers who, one in particular was a nun at St. Cletus's Catholic school back in a suburb of Chicago. I did part of my growing up in Chicago, and she was a former art teacher, so I became teacher's pet. And I think she was trying to get me into the order. She actually took me to the nunnery that she came from, and you know, there was the smell of baking cookies in the air, and I thought, okay, this might not be too bad. Nah.
I'm glad you didn't.
Yeah, I am too. Like a lot of artists, once I reached adulthood, I had to make a living, and I was part of a generation that was told you can't make a living as an artist. In fact, the counselor at my high school said, well, you know, there's always a place for I forget exactly what he called it, but it had to do with making dental molds.
Oh.
And, well, inside I thought, you're full of it, but at any rate, I did have to make a living. I did a lot of really drudge jobs. I worked in a women's wear warehouse for too many years. I did a lot of retail. Fortunately, most of that retail was an art supply store, so at least I could get my supplies at a discount. But the problem with that was if you're working a 40-hour week, you don't have much energy left over after dealing with the public to want to do art. In my early 20s, I was able to do that, but as time went on, it just became more difficult. I finally lucked out on an actual art job in my mid-30s. I walked into a print shop to get some color copies done of some of my pieces, and somebody in the back room heard the word portfolio. She came up front and took a look at what I had. She was a giftware designer, and she needed an assistant. So I went from about $2.50 an hour to about $20 an hour, which in Southern California is gold, or was at that time. Well, yeah. And I spent many years with her. One thing that she taught me in particular was how to see something in 3 dimensions, because we did everything from plush toys to music boxes to figurines, and we had to make it look good from all angles. And so I was able to start thinking in the round, even if I was doing a flat piece. There were certain restrictions involved because you couldn't have anything sticking out that could be broken in shipping. So you had to create something that represented what the client wanted, but at the same time was able to be shipped to stores pretty easily. I did that for about 10 years. And then I thought, well, I think I'm getting to be pretty good. And what I'd always wanted to be since childhood was an illustrator, a children's book illustrator. My mom always took me to the library, and at the time I was enthralled with the stories of King Arthur and his knights and Robin Hood, and one of the best illustrators of those stories was Howard Pyle. He did some painting, but a lot of his book illustrations were black and white, pen and ink. And the degree of detail that he got into those drawings, I mean, I wound up not even reading half of the book. I just flipped the pages and stared at the drawings. And Arthur Rackham was another. Mm-hmm. He had such a light touch. And these artists really created a world of their own. They highlighted the story, enhanced the story, and yet were their own place. And so I followed, basically I just followed their example. I tried to put in as much detail as I could and just create a world in an 8x10. At any rate, I decided I put together a little Xeroxed package showing various pieces of artwork. We didn't really have home computers back then, or at least not in the general population. So I was still using Xerox's cover sheet or cover letter, and I sent things out. One place was Vantage Press, which was a self-printing group that had been around since the 1940s. And they were looking for somebody for their children's book section. So that window opened. And then another place I sent them was to a magazine called Sage Woman, which is about women's spirituality, goddess religion, and the editor called me back and said, I've got your stuff sitting right in front of me on my desk. It just came in. We have a story that you can work on. It was as all the windows were opening. And eventually I got to the point where I could leave the giftware designer and be fully freelance. And I spent many years almost making a living. Well, the thing with freelance is that it's lovely when the work is there, and sometimes it's almost too much, because sometimes from the children's book company 2 or 3 stories would come in. I loved working for both of these places because the tremendous freedom that the editors gave me when they saw the first things I did for them and realized that they could trust me to stick with the story, yet at the same time enhance it. They said, do what you want. I mean, that's what every artist wants to hear is, just do what you want. It's all right.
And we'll pay you.
Oh, yes, yes, and getting paid for it. Freelance is good when it's coming in, but in between, I still had to go back to retail to bring the money in because I was on my own, and well, things have to be paid. Those 2 places took care of 2 aspects of my personality: the whimsical with the children's books, the spiritual with Sage Woman. And then there's the piss and vinegar, which has grown more pronounced as I get older. And that came about when I moved here. I had been taking the Berea Citizen back in California, where I lived for about 35 years. And I thought, they could use a political cartoonist. I mean, it's worth a try. So I hauled my portfolio up to the office, and it was Teresa and Scott back then, and as editors. They looked at it and said, "You're hired." And that was about 12 years of just being able to pretty much cut loose. And I think a fair number of people around here liked it. There'd be people whom I didn't even know coming up to me and saying, "Hey, great cartoon this week." Or, yeah, okay, thank you. And like I said, I was almost making a living between the freelance and the occasional retail work. I was doing all right. Then came the crash of 2008. I lost the children's book company entirely. They went bankrupt. Sage Woman, being a small publication, almost went under. To this day, I am still doing work for them, but I'm doing it in exchange for an ad in the magazine. We haven't talked about real money, getting back to real money yet, and I'm not sure if it's still possible, but it does take care of that spiritual side of me. So I'm happy to do it. The Citizen is a sadder story. The owner of the paper didn't like having such a liberal cartoonist, and I am a flaming liberal. And
Man, she's to the left of me.
I am. And when I called out one of his friends on something that was pretty horrific, he was in a county office, and basically he was responsible for cutting half of the charity budget for the county. And the directors of those entities who weren't lucky enough to stay on were told, "Well, you know, why don't you get out and join the trash abatement program? You'd be doing more good picking up trash in the neighborhood than whatever it is you're doing," which was a real slap in the face. Well, the editor that I was working under said, "Do it. Do it, do it, do it," because she had to go to his press conferences, and what he was saying was just horrific to her. So she was all about me doing a cartoon, and I did one, basically telling various organizations, well, are there no workhouses? Are there no trash abatement programs? And editor loved it, the owner did not. He gave the managing editor an earful, saying from now on she is not to do provocative political cartoons. Well, that's an oxymoron. I tried it for 2 months, and my husband here will account that I was miserable in those 2 months.
Oh yeah.
Trying to make my art fit. And it just wasn't, it didn't feel authentic at all. So I said goodbye to that last year. So basically, right now, I'm at a point where I have the time to do my art completely for the first time in my life, and I'm approaching 60. And I feel like I'm just taking a deep breath after everything else, and then, all right, on to the next phase of the journey. One problem that I was running into in the course of doing all this freelance work, and I don't know if any other artist has mentioned it, is a feeling of commodification, where every piece of art that you do has to be for the market. It's got to make money. And especially living on the knife's edge as I was, it really did. And some of the joy, a lot of the joy, just kind of went out of the creation. I felt more like an art machine than an artist. So in some ways, well, in a good many ways, I think, with the windows opening and then shutting again, it's been almost a blessing, because I am starting to sit down and do the things that have been in my bucket list, rattling around in the cauldron for years. And now I have the freedom to sit down and just do it. And if you don't feel like working on it right now, fine, do something else. I've taken up beading, thanks to Jimmy Lou Jackson and Bob and Judy Mattingly, whom I've made necklaces for. I kind of like doing that. It was something creative, where I worked around a focal piece, and then had every subsequent piece in the necklace coordinate with that.
Well, like the piece you're wearing.
Well, yes. And it's gotten to be a little addicting. I have a hard time staying off Etsy and going through the beads. I proudly proclaimed to the Mattingleys, well, I've started my second bead box, and they smiled at me as one would a slightly dim child and said, oh, that's nice. So, one artist said something years ago that I've always kept in mind, and that is read and read, learn and learn. This was his main piece of advice to up-and-coming artists, to his students. And God knows I read. I've got stacks next to the...
The reason we're moving is that not only have we run out of room on the bookshelves, is we've run out of room for bookshelves.
And also, I read on the internet, I read politics, I read just all manner of things, just to fill my head with possibilities.
And sometimes anger.
A lot of anger. Nature is another way that I find inspiration. Well, this piece was done, and it's one of the bucket list pieces. I was coming home from a trip, and I had a nice time, but I was glad to be coming home. And when I saw those green hills out the window, I just wanted to take them and wrap them around me like a comforting quilt. And so that's where that came from. one of the things that Ben Sean, the artist I'm referring to, also said was that work from your own experience, work from your own perceptions. And I pretty much have. I think if you spread out all the work that I've done over a lifetime, you can see more or less where I was at that time, what was going on in my head. There's one thing that really does hurt my heart, and that's when people will look at my work and say, oh, that's so wonderful. I'm not creative. And I try to tell them, if they let me, yes, you are. Creativity is hardwired into the human psyche. We can't help but be. And the only reason we may not be feeling creative is that somehow or another it's been quashed. Whether in school, whether in work, whether in family life, somewhere it got stomped on. And one doesn't have to work with a pencil or a pen or a brush to be creative. Raising a good human being is creative. Creating a garden is creating. Cooking a wonderful meal, that's creative. Being able to sew, which I can't do, is creative. There are all different ways of being creative. Basically, you just open your senses and go take a walk. I like walking through town and sometimes through the cross-country course. And I'll see things in nature that just spark little things inside me, little resonances. Sometimes I'll go out there with my iPhone and take pictures. That's mostly what I use it for. I took a picture of what used to be called the fairy tree. A lot of older local people remember it. They remember it from childhood, playing in it, because it was an enormous, centuries-old oak tree that was towards the start of the cross-country trail. I used to call it the Green Man. It was like a guardian to the rest of the forest. And unfortunately, it was struck down by lightning, and it turned out that it was about to go anyway because it was pretty much hollow all the way down. So now there are all these bits and pieces lying around, and a little bit of the trunk, maybe 10 foot of what used to be maybe a 60-foot or more tree. And I was walking in the woods one day, and I noticed this little green plant growing more or less in the middle of where the trunk used to be. Part of the trunk had fallen away, and within, almost cradled in what was left of the trunk, was this little green plant. And I thought, what if I turn this into a tribute to that tree that so many people loved, and put, instead of the plant that was there, a tiny oak seedling coming up amidst all the destruction. Here is new creation. And that's a big motif in a lot of my pieces. Destruction and rebirth, because it's gone through my life as a continuing theme. So, oh, let's see, what else did I? Well, and I also get, all right, now I'm on my soapbox. I get upset with people who say, well, art is a frill. It appalled me when I first came out here in 2003 that there were no real art classes, permanent art classes in the high schools or in the lower grades. It was somebody with a cart full of supplies going room to room. But of course the sports were doing quite well. You know, we do need to be physically fit, but we also have to be emotionally fit, spiritually fit. And art is such a big part of that. Any of the arts. When schools started teaching to the test, first I was grateful that I wasn't there anymore. But also I felt so sorry for these children who were just having all their love of life and beauty and creating just ground out of them. I've heard of kids going home in tears because they were just so frustrated. They weren't really learning anything, and most kids want to learn. They're excited about the world around them, and they want to know what it's all about. And creativity of any kind is a way of the human being to relate to the rest of the world and to their fellow human beings. You know, I feel this way. Do you feel this way too? Have you felt this way? Would you like to? So, speaking of also working from personal experience, I haven't had a chance to matter frame this, but this is another bucket list thing. One of my favorite fairy tales is Hans Christian Andersen's The Ugly Duckling. I grew up feeling like one. And what the duckling says at the very end of the story still brings a lump to my throat. It says, "Of such happiness I never dreamt of when I was the ugly duckling." We all stay there. Well, all right, maybe not. We all have creativity within us. No matter how much of an ugly duckling we think we might be, we can still turn into swans. That's part of the human psyche too. And that's what creativity, and at least that's what my art is all about. So, any questions? Any answers?
One thing I noticed, we used to spend hours drawing as a kid, and my grandchildren, they can hardly draw because they do computer games. But I
Yeah.
can't interfere. I want to, but I can't.
Well, I'm not really sure what the answer is to that, except basically make them an offer they can't refuse.
Yeah.
You know, say there's this really gorgeous area out here. Let's go out to it. Let's see what's happening out there. And, you know, no expectations of anything, just let's go out there. You'd be amazed, I think, at the way children left to themselves. Well, how old are they? How old are your grandchildren?
Oh, 12 and 6 and 7.
Okay.
Yeah, there's still hope.
Yes, there is. Once they become teenagers, then there's a whole set of things.
But I notice their friends too, they just don't have the same,
Well,
skill in drawing.
There's for one thing, it's not being offered that much in the school. And our whole society really does not put any kind of emphasis on creativity because most of the time it doesn't make any money. And that's what this dominant society is all about. It's about making money, being rich. Well,
I notice Walmart has all these projects, but they're all just set out for you. There's no figuring it out and being the creative process. It's all laid out for you, this step, that step. Tie-dye kits, everything.
Right.
Kits.
Right. Although it might be a good way to start.
Yeah.
I mean, at least, especially, well, what you just mentioned with the tie-dye kits, but even just if that's where their propensities lie, if they want to draw or paint, they might want to play a musical instrument, they might want to dance, they might want to be up on the stage.
Yeah.
You know, as much as you can, just take them to school plays or the college offers programs throughout the year of music, and it's free.
Oh, yeah.
The college also has a pretty good art museum, and just something that, and then just kind of watch them and see how they react.
Wake them up.
Yeah, and don't let them take their electronics with them either. I remember going on a hike up the Pinnacles, and it was a young couple in their 20s, and the guy was fighting and losing, trying to get his girlfriend to notice what was going on around them, the beauty of this place. Because she was constantly on her iPhone, you know, calling people or just whatever. I would have pushed her over the edge.
Tell us how you really feel.
Well, yeah. But yeah, just expose them as much as you can. Because they're not, at least right now, getting it in school. And it's a shame. It really is.
Now, in of all places, Texas, my son tells me that his son, who is 9, is getting art classes, but it's from a community center in the local town.
Right.
The school couldn't care less.
Right. Well, it's other organizations that often have these things, like the Arts Council. Just, you know, go online to the community board or pick up a copy of the paper and just see what's happening.
Did you ever teach?
No, I don't even know how I do it myself. You know, I can't imagine trying to teach other people how. And really all that I could tell them is, well, you just have to keep doing it. Do it, do it, do it, do it. It doesn't matter how awful it might look. You just have to keep doing it. Keep honing your eye. You know, I don't have any magic tricks to teach you. Well, okay, maybe a few. You know, using negative space if you can't figure out what the positive space is doing. Okay, if the main body or the main thing that you're trying to draw, just the proportions don't seem right, then look instead to kind of shift your focus to the shapes that are going on around it. That has helped me. Sometimes I'll just flip a picture upside down too, and then I'll say, oh, that's not right, that's too long, or that's too short, or it's sticking out too far. Drawing on the left side of the brain is a book that's been around for a long time, and a lot of people have taught classes based on that book. And it's really all about just changing your focus. Little things that you can do that will help you see more fully. And it helps. But
I know you did some writing for the newspaper. Do you do any other writing?
not really. Teresa Centers the editor of the paper, came up to me one day, about maybe a month after I joined the paper, and she said, "You're creative. I'll bet you can write as well as you draw." Okay. I'm a natural introvert, and it's very difficult for me I can relate to people one-on-one, I can relate to small groups, but just meeting somebody cold and asking them what they do really took me out of my comfort zone. I enjoyed it pretty much until it became too hectic, because they really need more writers, or they did at that time. And it was basically the editor and me for a long time doing stories. And when you can't count on having a certain amount of time free because, oops, this came up, out, get a story, get some pictures, it gets tough. But I did enjoy it very much. One of the first stories I did for them was actually a research piece, which I like doing best of all, on Indian Fort, which is not a fortification at all, as it turns out, and isn't quite tall enough to be a mountain, but it'll do. For anyone who's walked up.
Yeah.
Yeah. I did some delving into the Berea College archives, and there had been a group of archaeologists from Berea College and some other places who had gone up there, and what they found was that there were no signs of combat, no signs of weaponry. What they did find were some basic walls and some small artifacts that were of a warlike nature. And the scientists came to the conclusion that it was actually a sacred site. It was a place, it might also have been an astronomical site, because you not only have Indian Fort Mountain there, but you've got these other larger knobs like Pilot Knob and some of the others around. And I could just see signal fires going up these places. Perhaps you had whole groups going up onto these knobs and doing a group ceremony of some kind, or doing a group astronomical reading, or both, because
That would be a
It
nice
wasn't-
drawing for you to do.
Well, as it turns out, we're going to be moving to a place near the knobs. In fact, I'll be looking out the backyard, and there's Pilot Knob rising up out of the mist, and then I think the northern face of the Pinnacles on one side. Then there's another knob a little bit further down the road whose name I can't remember, and then of course Pilot Knob. So
When she saw the view out the kitchen window, she said, "I'm home."
well, let's just say that washing dishes will never be quite the same.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
So I I did enjoy doing the writing. I found a cousin or two while I was at it. A couple of children had found a Civil War era cannonball near a nearby creek, and it turns out that their father was a cousin. His last name was Kirby. So I found, long lost kindred and just all kinds of really fascinating people. I mean, even a town as small as this has a lot of stories to tell.
What's your preferred medium to work in?
I like doing pencil and watercolor for my color work, and then I'll do pen and ink for the political drawings that sometimes I still feel moved to do. I did oils when I was younger. They're messy, they're smelly. I like the smell, but I'm told it's not good for one to inhale it for any length of time. I worked in acrylics when I was in high school and hated them because the color that I laid out never seemed to be the same once it had dried. And maybe they've improved since then because the library wanted me to do a project for them. And what I did were these little local animals, like raccoons and possum, for their preschool area to go across the arch. And I did that all in acrylic. And it actually wasn't as bad as it had been. I mean, I got along with it much better this time. So. Well, thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's great to hear your story.
Thank you.
Yeah.